I think we have a big problem in society in that younger people, we're telling them a lie. We're telling young people that you go to school, you work hard, you go to university, you come out, you'll get a good job. It's not panning out like that.
So ladies and gentlemen, this is Hugo Ward, the CEO of Cuckoo Creative, and a very good friend of mine, and I've been dying to get him into the show, and he's made some time in his diary. Welcome, sir.
Good to be here, Rich. Good to be here.
So we've got so much to go through, but I think, well, first of all, how did we meet?
We met because I moved into this space. So my background, as you know, is a documentary maker, filmmaker, journalist, and I was at The Economist. I set up a film unit within The Economist. I'd made documentaries for a lot of British TV, Channel 4, BBC.
Was it Dispatches?
Channel 4 Dispatches I did for many years, so a lot of investigative journalism. And then I left The Economist and I went to work for another trading company. And then I started getting into this world and I found it fascinating. And then I kind of came across you on Instagram and basically got you into this line of work.
That's
right?
exactly it. I'd never been in front of a camera before, and Hugo, sort of talked me into it, and here we are.
Here we are. What,
Who would
3
have
years
thought?
later?
That's right. Yeah. So take us back. So we're going to chat about investments in a minute, and really, having worked at The Economist, having worked at another investment firm, was it something you studied at school?
No, I had no idea. I didn't have. It's funny because I look at all of my mates who ended up going into finance, and they had a lot of influence from parents or usually dads in that world, and I didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
I was English, and I enjoyed that side as creative brain. But when it came to finance, I had no idea at all. I mean, zero understanding of finance.
Right. And then, so what was your passion then?
My passion was journalism, geopolitics.
Yeah.
I really, I looked at a Michael Palin documentary when I was about 12 years old, and I was like, oh my God, when he was traveling around the world with Michael Palin in 80 days. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And I love travel. I love geopolitics.
Yeah.
I love people and telling people stories. So, and that's what I ultimately got into and made documentaries in, 30 different countries around the world. So I've been very lucky, had a great career just traveling the world and doing fun things and telling people stories. And that's what investing is about. It's stories for me.
Yeah.
And I knew nothing about investing. And then I think I got to the age of late 20s, and my older brother said to me, mate, you're 27 and you know nothing. You haven't got any savings and you're doing nothing. I was like, oh God. So he sent me a book called The Richest Man in Babylon.
Right.
And have you ever come across it?
No.
It's an ancient Greek book written years ago and translated throughout the years, but it's the principles of money. It's a very thin book, so you'll read it very quickly, or it might take you a while, Rich, but
very good.
It was a book that's like just the fundamentals of money and how money works. And my brother sent it to me knowing that I was a complete moron and I needed a bit of educating.
Right.
And then by the age of 30, I'd moved back from Australia in London. A mate of mine was a financial advisor. And he said, you've got to start paying into a pension. You've got to start investing. So I started putting 500 quid a month into a savings plan with him. And then it wasn't until I think lockdown that I thought, okay, I've got a bit of a pension here.
Recently?
It wasn't until lockdown where, I was putting money aside, but it wasn't until lockdown COVID that I was like, oh God, I've really got to educate myself here.
Okay. So what happened during lockdown then? What was your investment journey? Because we've heard a few.
I realised that, people had time on their hands. I had friends of mine who started trading and started doing really well.
Yeah.
So I went on the App Store, looked at trading apps. Which one did I pick? Happens to be IG, because it was the only one I'd really heard of because of brand and cricket. And so I downloaded the app and I started trading, not really knowing what I was doing at all. And then I quickly realised that trading kind of wasn't for me. But what I did find fascinating was the fact that the majority of my wealth is in pensions. And then I was like, what? like, I don't know what this money's doing. It's sitting there, and there's a substantial amount, and I have no idea whether it's in the right pot, what we're doing. And that just scared me. I just thought, I've got a family, I've got kids, I really should understand this. We spend all of our lives, all of our waking hours at work, making this money to put aside as a nest egg, in pensions, in ISAs. And then the thing is, I don't know what it's doing.
Exactly.
And I just thought, it's got to change. I've got to start educating myself.
And there's so much of that out there. And that's one of the main reasons, the main aims of this channel is to not just chat about, right, what's going on at 8 a.m. on the open, in and out of British Airways or something like that, but to educate people on their options in their pensions, on, are you just in an S&P tracker now? Are you in a world tracker? So, where did that take you to where you are now?
When I started, I just thought, right, who do I know who really understands the markets? And it turns out that a lot of people who work in finance don't really understand the market. That was a big education for me. I was like, wow, because you get people who are financial advisors, they don't understand the markets. And what I realised is a lot of stockbrokers, for example, they don't really understand the markets. What they're very, very good at is saying, right, being tax efficient, understanding inheritance tax, what you do here, so they're brilliant at the planning, the technicals of that. But when it comes to the markets and understanding, how to make money on the markets, they don't really understand it in the way that a trader would, or somebody who really analyzes the markets.
This is what I learned very early on, was that I think your approach was, okay, if I need a lawyer, right, I go to somebody who's an expert in law and I trust what they say.
Yeah.
And a doctor, the same. If you want to get a good investment, I saw that you believed, okay, well, my friends that are investment bankers or stockbrokers, they will know the investment, and therefore whatever they say, I'll put the money into. And markets just aren't like that, are they? Sometimes it works, but just as often it doesn't.
It's a bit like, it's like, just put a bit in there, put a bit in there, put a bit in there.
Yeah.
Because they're set up to kind of manage risk rather than really understanding what's happening on the markets and the long-term outlook. So what I learned very quickly is, I don't really care for the technicals. I'm just like, my brain doesn't work like that. I can't be bothered. It's too much and I'm too old and I just don't want to do that. What I do find fascinating is the fundamentals, is looking at the geopolitics, understanding what's happening. And I find that I get a real buzz. So I could, and I have made films on the subject, half the time you're better off just putting it in an S&P tracker and leaving it. The fact is, that's a bit dull and a bit boring and I don't get excitement.
It's very vanilla.
It's very vanilla. And I could just, cut my losses and think, actually, that's a pretty safe way of investing. But I don't want to. And actually, I really enjoy seeing things that are happening or catching something in my periphery and thinking, ooh, that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And then it's learning to trust what I've seen and what I think could happen. Because what I've learned is, even though I know nothing about the markets or I'm not in this world, nor does anyone else. And that is the biggest learning I've taken.
Absolutely.
Like, yes, there are people I go to who really understand metals or precious metals, or and they know that market inside. And I'm never going to understand that market, so I'll just ask them what their thoughts are, and they'll share, what they think, and I'll choose to follow that or not.
Yeah.
But the truth is that nobody knows, and I get a massive kick out of telling my mates in finance that actually I've seen something and I think this is going to happen, and they go, yeah, whatever, mate. And then I do it, in a safe way, not betting the house on it, but and then I find that 6 months later I'm like, remember I said that? Well, look,
And so what you're talking about is a diversified portfolio, and some in the geopolitics, ideas that you're talking about, some in metals that you've heard about. I know Cameco was a huge winner for you, and some trackers.
Yeah.
But just mainly diversified, because that softens the blow. And crypto, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and tell us who you've worked with on that side of things as well.
I did a lot of work for CoinMarketCap, which is a big data platform.
Yeah.
Now owned by Binance. So is quite interesting because you're working with all these people at the coal face of the data of crypto.
Really?
That was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Their salaries, are one thing, what they make on the markets, crypto markets, because of course they see all of the data on
and the information
yeah. And they have all the data on meme coins, and meme coins has been the wild west. I mean, I'm just not, I don't have the time or the brain span, but these young kids working at CoinMarketCap are doing very well because they see all the data.
And I think that's why we know it's really hard for us on the outside, because we have no idea. So that's probably why they're so dangerous, is because there's people that really know what's going on. But as a space as a whole, it's really interesting, isn't it? And
I've enjoyed it. I mean, I've definitely. I think I learned a lot through crypto about group psychology, FOMO, and then there was a lot that I didn't understand about crypto. And the only reason I got into it is because somebody told me 2013, a friend of mine, an American friend of mine, said, he's tried to explain it to me, and I looked at him blankly going, mate, I have no idea what you're talking about. I really do not understand this. And then I saw him again in 2017 in Bermuda for the America's Cup, and he was like, Hugo, please just start investing.
Wow.
And I did. I put in a small amount, and that small amount did me quite well. And then I was like, wow. But then my whole journey in crypto is like, as soon as there was a bit of hype around crypto, I piled in at the top of the market. Then there was a crash for 3 years, and I was like, oh, this is rubbish. Then there's hype. Then I invested again. So what am I doing? And then I understood the patterns, and then
the hype cycle.
And I, being a moron and not wanting to miss out, I just went in on the hype every time. And now I look at it and think, I've got to stop doing that. But do I? No. But the fact is, I think
you've tapered it a little.
I've tapered it a little, but I think if that's 5% of my portfolio, then and again, and this is, so my mates who work in finance go, still a lot of them are going, oh, you don't crypto, I can't get into crypto because I don't understand it. And actually, they have something to lose because they work in a financial sector. Yeah. And actually, if crypto were to really gain traction, they have something to lose. So intrinsically, I think there's a bias. And their argument to me is, I can't invest in crypto because I don't understand it. And my argument back to them is, I don't really understand the markets, but who understands the markets? But we all invest in it.
Right. And especially when it's 5% of your overall wealth.
Yeah.
Then it's manageable, and it leads into that sort of diversified idea that we talk about. What would you, just come back to the hype cycle, what would you say to the people at home that are maybe younger than ourselves? What would be the learning?
I'm younger than you, Rich.
Yeah, by about 6 months. What would be the learning from avoiding buying into the hype? When it's really peak and when things have already moved?
Well, a lot of people, when I was working at The Economist, used to say, if you read it in The Economist, it's already too late. And The Economist isn't about the markets, it's about global trends. Yeah. What I would say is, in my experience, is, listen, I'm not a technicals guy, I'm not a trader, but I really enjoy looking at global trends. Obviously, AI, you can't avoid it. But I think there are lots of trends that are happening in the world now. And I think future gazing is what I find fascinating. Yeah. And that's what The Economist is very, very good at. It's looking into the future and looking at future trends. Mm-hmm. So it's not the markets happening now, but it's like, what are the things that are going to happen? And if this takes over, then what's that going to mean for future investments? Driverless cars, going to be a big thing. Satellites. I find it fascinating. You look in the Black Sea and you see China and Russia quite clearly cutting cables, and this is a big problem, because if this starts happening in the Atlantic, what's it going to mean for the markets? What's it going to mean for satellites? And so these are the things that I find really interesting. And I think actually I'm willing to take a bit of a punt, future gazing, about what's going to happen in the future. And I think actually if I go in now when nobody's talking about it, with small amounts, I find that fascinating, because if the worst case scenario happens and all of a sudden there are attacks, on cables in the Atlantic, then what does that mean? For example. So to young people, I just think, don't do what everyone does and you will have to do it and you'll learn. It's like, do not get in on the hype. If you're seeing it on the news, you're already too late. There are lots of people who will have got in before you and the market will have factored that in. But it's actually taking a longer term view. Mm-hmm. I look at my kids and I've got an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. So I was like, what do I do now? Because I haven't set up a trust and I haven't done this stuff. And so I could put money in and think into a pension for them now, put $5,000 by the time they're 60, crikey.
Yeah.
Or I could set up, I haven't done any of this stuff. I've been a bit slow off the mark. But then I'm thinking, why don't I just put $5,000 for each of them? If I can squirrel that away, and that's my nest egg for them, in the hope that it might turn into something. Because the upsides could be far, far, far greater than a traditional investment.
Yeah.
But equally,
Yeah, equally it could go to zero just for the.
But it could, of course it could.
You have your own digital agency, Cuckoo Creative, but you've now expanded into something else, haven't you?
Yeah, so we're launching something on the side. I think we have a big problem in society in that younger people, we're telling them a lie. We're telling young people that you go to school, you work hard, you go to university, you come out, you'll get a good job. It's not panning out like that. Have you looked at the job numbers in the UK recently, or the unemployment numbers? There aren't the vacancies. AI is going to transform the working world, and the education system is so far behind. So I've set up something called LFG, or Let's Fearlessly Go, and it's giving young people an education. It's a course, video-led course, which is funky and very cool, that gives them an education in how to get a job, how to understand what their values are, how to create an elevator pitch, all about networking. Why didn't anyone tell me about networking? I thought the networking was having to go to events and go, oh, this is awkward, and give people business cards. That's not the way. So how to use LinkedIn, how to do your personal brand, how to understand jobs, keywords, algorithms. So you see on the BBC, I saw the other day, this girl saying, I've applied for 200 jobs and I haven't even heard back from any of them. And I'm like, you know what? And I feel so sorry for her. And it's because actually the algorithms are turning you down and you don't understand. Nobody's told you how to play with it, how to do it. Yeah. Also, so many kids are coming through and they're lacking soft skills. So this is a 17-part module, which basically gives young people leaving school or university the education they need to thrive and to understand how to get into the workplace.
Fantastic.
Because I really think this education is lacking, and I think schools and universities are so far behind the curve when it comes to what young people need to get a job.
Now, anybody at home, maybe with a son or daughter that are school age or going into university, how do they find you?
www.letsfearlesslygo.com and on Insta as well, and LinkedIn. So give us a follow. So we are officially launching in 10 days' time, and there's a waiting list for that. But listen, there are lots of things going on, and this journey's been really interesting. Speaking to people who, we talk about risk, right? This is an interesting one. We are, get your head around this, the first generation in human history not to allow our children risk. We don't let them out of our sight. We're helicopter parenting, and this is a really sad state of affairs. So what's that going to mean for the future of investing?
That's scary, isn't it? That is a great way to finish off today's show. Hugo, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in.
Thanks for having me.